just went up. Welcome to the 2015 Woodstock Film Festival. I don't know, it sounds a little much for me. Maybe you should lower the volume a little bit. Thank you. It's the very first event, the very first day for the 16th annual festival, and couldn't be happier with what we're about to do now, even though it's not all maybe happy talk, but it's definitely going to be a very interesting and valuable talk. Before we start, I do want to thank some of our key sponsors at the Woodstock Film Festival, without whom we wouldn't be here for the 16th year that we've been making it all this time. So Marketech, thank you so very much. Toyota, love you. And 120 DB Films, thank you. And to all the sponsors who have been helping us. Again, and not-for-profit organizations such as ours would never exist without the support of our sponsors and individual contributors. So some of you may very well be here in this room, so thank you. And thank our staff and volunteer, of course. Before I introduce our very important and wonderful speaker, Josh Fox, I want to tell you a little bit about what's to come at the festival. Tonight at UPAC in Kingston, we have an amazing film and concert with Jackson Browne and a whole bunch of really great musicians from Cuba, including Carlos Varela, who is the Bob Dylan of Cuba. And I met him earlier. He was doing sound check, and he's incredible. So I hope that you still get a chance to go there and enjoy this very amazing kickoff event. And after that, tomorrow, Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday, we are all over the Hudson Valley. We're in Woodstock and Kingston and Rhinebeck and Rosendale and Saugerties with lots and lots of movies and panels and concerts and parties and events and enormous amount of filmmakers who are coming here from all over the world and the US. So hopefully the rain will not deter too many of us too much. And you know, if you're quick, you'll just walk in between the drops and come in and out of movies and get to meet a lot of the wonderful filmmakers. So now, without further ado, I want to bring somebody who's really, really special. Josh Fox, can you come up here?
Thank you.
I first met Josh when we showed Gasland, must have been 6-7 years ago, at Onteora School District. Over 600 people came. We had a long talk afterwards with Josh and with Congressman Maurice Hinchey, and after which hundreds of people from the audience flooded the phones of the local politicians, and hopefully together made a difference. Josh, as you know, is a one-band movement. And he truly has mobilized and created the anti-fracking movement in New York State and beyond, and we truly proud to have you. So thank you so much for coming. Josh Fox.
I know we're having some microphone hijinks today, but I just want to say thank you so much to Maira and to Woodstock Film Festival. It's fantastic to be back here. It was an incredible, memorable showing of Gasland in 2010, and it was one of the first times that we had done it in a context that was not sort of the Hollywood context. It was a way of engaging on a grassroots level, and that became the hallmark of how that film was shown. It went all over the world. I personally did 300 different dates in 300 different cities, and that was because the fracking movement was being built at the same time as that film was coming out. And it was a symbiotic relationship where we basically put out to a very small email list, so if we came to your town, would you put the movie on? And people were like, yes. So we kept getting that yes. And then Park Foundation and 11th Hour and a few other fledgling fund came and just sent us on the road. And we just kept going. And it was an amazing experience to watch a movement be born and become something. Because people knew that, we're getting fracked in our backyard in PA. But they didn't realize that the same thing was happening to folks in Wyoming, and the same thing was happening to people in New Mexico, and the same thing that was going to imperil New York State, and California, and France, and Australia, and Thailand, and, all across Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, everywhere around the globe. And that was something where we just kept going and kept trying to make connections and connect people and connect the dots. And as you know, happily, I think you probably know, last year, right around this time, it was in December actually, New York State banned fracking. Which was, would never have happened. It would never have happened if it wasn't for the total arrogance and obnoxious elitism of New Yorkers saying, you want to do what? Where? We don't care if you're ExxonMobil. We don't care if you're the richest, most influential corporations in the history of money. We don't care. We're New Yorkers. So get the hell out of here. And that attitude, I think, was extraordinarily inspiring, but it also incurred this incredible momentum and organization of people. And what I watched happening was, my film and the movement in the Upper Delaware River Basin, which is in New York and Pennsylvania. It's the border right there, right? That sort of liminal space between New York and Pennsylvania where you're not really either and you're sort of both. 5 people sitting around a picnic table on a Sunday, every Sunday, became the Damascus Citizens for Sustainability, a group with a reach of thousands and thousands later. Or watching Catskill Citizens for Safe Energy start the same way, 5 or 6 people sitting around a table. NYH2O, one of the groups that I helped found with Joe Levine, again, 5, 6 people hanging out, figuring out, we're going to meet once a week. What day do you want to meet? Thursday? Okay, we'll do Thursday, And that becomes this, you have enough of those people, you have a huge movement. So I want to start today, though, this talk, because this is a new topic for me. I'm making a new film on climate change. And we will submit it to Sundance Film Festival in about 10 days. So if you're a filmmaker, you know what I'm going through right now. I arrived here 5 minutes before I was supposed to go on, and I'm leaving. Right, I have to go back to the edit room. But this is the largest production I've ever made. It's filming on 6 continents, every one of them where there are people. So we didn't go to Antarctica, and all fossil fuel activism. And I hope this is true of the fractivists in the House and in all of New York State. All of that activism leads you down the path of looking at climate change. And it's kind of remarkable how you can, if you are, looking at something that's invading you in your backyard, like a lot of people in fracking are, how you can kind of miss the big picture after a while because there's this looming threat of here's the well and it's going to come in the backyard and we're going to have volatile organic compounds coming in our windows and our water's going to go and we're going to have trucks everywhere. So this is a crisis, right? This is an emergency. And it's sometimes hard to then catapult your imagination forward to what could happen in the future. But if you really go into all of this, the big one and the most disturbing and the most, in a way, it's the greatest human challenge civilization's ever faced, is what is happening with the climate, what will happen with the climate, we know will happen with the climate, and what aspects of this are preventable and what aspects of this are not, of the coming emergency. And so you kind of have to go in that direction. So in a way, this is the 3rd film in this trilogy. It's not going to be called Gasland 3. The working title is Return of the Jedi, but we actually don't have a title, so we got 10 days to figure it out. But the idea that this is that from a knock at the door, which many of you probably received, which is a consciousness moment of like, oh, these fracking people are coming for me now, to an appreciation of what's happening all over the globe. And with fossil fuels in general and with carbon emissions in general, CO2 and methane. That's quite a long journey, and it's been 8 years of that evolution for me, and this film has been going on in the background for 5 years. So it's a culmination, and I'm very excited about it. So I want to talk to you about that. But to get started in the right way, I want to tell you a little story about activism in this region and how that one of those moments which, in my mind, really encapsulates and is emblematic of what happened here in New York State and what is continuing to happen. And that's the story of the last time that I saw Pete Seeger, that I was with Pete Seeger. Some of you may have heard this story before, but it's every time I tell it, something new happens, so whatever. It was in the town of Milford, PA, a tiny little river town. They have a great theater there. And a bunch of fractivists in Milford called up Pete Seeger, and this was in 2013, the last year of his life, and said, we need some inspiration. We're in trouble. We need you to come. Can you come and give a concert and help inspire us? You know? And it was a room not that much bigger than this room. I mean, maybe twice the size, maybe about 300 people. And, you know, as always, if he could, Pete said, sure, I'll come. And he came, 93 years old, you know, full band, you know, ready to do a whole show. And they called me up and asked me to introduce him. I said, whoa, okay, I can do that. And I arrived, and it was a 100-year-old theater with a 93-year-old Pete Seeger. And I had this idea, this very particular idea of what I wanted to play. I was going to play something on the banjo to introduce him, and I had this very particular song that I wanted to do. And I wanted to know if that was going to be okay with him, you know, because it could be potentially controversial. So I said, Pete, hi, it's Josh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I want to play this very particular song to introduce you. And he looks at me backstage and he goes, you know, that was the greatest hit song of 1814. You know, like he was there, you know. He says, a fellow sang that song in a bar one night, and it was such a big hit, he had to sing it twice. I guess in those days you had to sing it twice if you wanted to hear it again, because there's no records and no jukebox and no MP3. Such a big hit, he had to sing it twice. And then, clip-clop at 4 miles an hour, all the way up and down the Atlantic coast, that song became the most popular song in the United States of America. I said, wow, I didn't know that. And I knew there was a lesson inside of this story. I hadn't quite figured it out. So I'm going to play it for you now. And you tell me if you can figure out what it is. I'm going to use this stool. Uh-oh. I knew this is, I'm going to start going this way. Wait. This is part of the routine. This is why it costs $15 to get in. Physical comedy. Wait. This is one of those things where you start playing and then you start going this way. Oh, shit. Okay. Can you hear that? Is that coming through? Oh, by the way, thanks to Woodstock Music Shop for lending me this for the afternoon. Don't usually do endorsements, but it's been such a hectic day, I walked out of my house without my banjo. Star Spangled Banner, you know. Adopted as the national anthem in 1930. You know, and I learned a lot of lessons from Pete Seeger over the years, most of them from afar. You know, I mean, the first concert I ever went to was Pete Seeger. Second concert I ever went to was Pete Seeger. The third concert I ever went to was Pete Seeger. The fourth and fifth concerts I went to were Pete Seeger. The sixth concert I went to was Kiss. The seventh concert I went to was Pete Seeger. You know, I had those kind of parents. And my mom is actually here. Where's my mom? There she is. And people are like, my mom is famous in the fracking world. I go to places in like Colorado, and they're like, we're glad you're here, but we like your mom better. So I don't really know how to take that sometimes. You should go meet her afterwards, though. So I'd learned a lot of lessons from Pete Seeger over the years, most of them from afar. But this one I got right up close. You know, I learned that if you want New York City to be involved, you know, in a conversation about the environment, remind them that their water comes from 100 miles away upstate, right? I learned that music and culture is a great way to start a conversation about politics and organizing. But this lesson I got right up close. And of course, it is, be careful what you do in a bar. You might start a nation. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The lesson was, if a bar song can become the national anthem of the United States, then we're really just making up America as we go along. And anything is possible. And anything can happen. And as Pete said, when he was campaigning against fracking, singing "This Land Is Your Land" in the lobby of the state capitol building in Albany, he said, anything can happen. And he was right. Because no one thought that we were going to be able to win and actually ban fracking. But the people said, no, we're going to do this. And they believed in it. And what I think he was doing that night in Milford, PA, was charging that audience with the responsibility of writing the next great song, of doing that next amazing thing in a bar or in your living room or in a room like this or wherever it is, that 200 years from now would become the defining principles of our culture and of what we are. And that would signal the next couple of centuries. Think about it on that scale. That's what I think Pete Seeger was charging that fracking movement to do. And I think it's in that tradition, I think, that this film festival exists, and that so much of our art and culture that we're producing and creating now, that's why we do it. We don't do it just to sort of be entertaining. We do it because when you make dramatic work and you make documentary work, you're telling the emblematic and important stories of our age. And without the politics, they don't exist. There's no great play, for example, ever been written. You can't name one. From Hamlet to the Greeks to Macbeth to the Death of a Salesman, you know, that isn't explicitly about the politics of its time. There is no great storytelling. There is no great art without that. Unless it's a comedy, which is about love, which is good. But do you understand drama, what I'm talking about? You can't have that without explicitly acknowledging what lessons people are supposed to gain from it. When I was in Indonesia, there were these Dutch anthropologists who were studying the Balinese mask dances that the shamans were doing. And they were so fascinated by these ritual dance, the origin of the theater, really, the origin of performance, the origin of storytelling, which is what film comes from, right? And they were fascinated by this one shaman. They brought him all the way to, to the Netherlands and said, okay, we've set up this thing. All these people came and they said, well, please now do your mask dance. And he was like, I don't understand. What do you mean? And they're like, the dance that you do, it's awesome. Like, do it. We want to see it. We want to show it to people and analyze this and write academic papers about it and so forth. And he was like, but well, who's sick? Because, like, the dance was the healing dance, and he was the shaman. And he was like, I'm not going to do the dance if nobody's sick. That's what it's about. And, that's the way stories work. You don't do them unless there's something that you're trying to address and something that you're trying to heal. We mistake that a lot, I think, when we end up making movies about our own lives in a kind of very narcissistic way. Fine, things are important to you, but they also have to be important to everybody else, right? Or else they're not really a story. So with that in mind, I want to tell you a story about a very particular day I had last week, which I think opens up a whole series of questions. So I was asked to go give a speech like this in Winnipeg, Canada. I'm often asked to go do some speech somewhere. And I really, really, really wanted to take the train. I love trains. I love the whole experience of being on the train. I often go on the train back and forth to Los Angeles or back and forth to Denver because, first of all, I do not want to burn that carbon that's coming out of the back of an airplane, right? The experience of being on an airplane is incredibly unpleasant, especially now where they don't even serve you food and then you have to buy something that's sort of the approximation of food. And then the facsimile of food, I don't want to do it that way because I'm sitting here talking about climate change. So I want to get a train, and I'm so excited to take the train to Winnipeg. It's like, Canadian trains. This could be a whole different universe. And then I find out the train to Winnipeg only comes every 3 days. So it's going to be a 10-day affair to sort of get there and back because it's all the wrong days, right? So there's no way I can afford it. I can't afford it in time. I can't afford it in money. It's impossible. Now, I was just in China about 3 months ago. And in China, you can take a high-speed rail, the equivalent of going from New York to LA in 12 hours, to any city in the entire country. Because they decided they wanted to build high-speed rail. And they decided to do it. And it's all like within the last 20 years. Meanwhile, New York City hasn't added a single subway line. Well, the one that's on the Upper East Side doesn't count because it's just for rich people. In 40 years, right? So I was really disappointed that I had to fly. So I had a 6 a.m. flight, which is, if you're arriving at LaGuardia Airport at 4:30 in the morning for a 6 a.m. flight is one way to truly hate every person you encounter. You want to become a total misanthrope, get to LaGuardia at 4:30 a.m. for your 6 a.m. flight. Every single person is the most annoying person you'll ever meet. And then, so you're already in that state. And then you get into the lobby, and there's the CNN is blaring in your little terminal. And they have the extra chipper kind of morning hair flip anchors who are so chipper and so awake that have to be like on drugs because they're like trying to get ahead in the world of anchoring, which means that you've somehow contorted every possible piece of news into something that you're trying to make sexy and alive, so you sound completely ridiculous. And they're there being super happy, and they're the lead stories of the day. Number 1, flash floods in Utah. Flash floods in Utah killed 12 people. Their flash floods came down, grabbed a few cars. Nobody knew where the cars went. They were gone. Whoa. Next story. Fires in California. Wildfires. Pictures of people racing down mountains with trees on fire all on either side of the road, praying. You can hear them on the soundtrack. Don't fall. Don't fall. Don't fall. Don't fall into the road. Trees that are on fire. Spellbinding. Unbelievable. Next story. Refugees in Europe from Syria. You've seen these stories, I'm sure. The camera woman kicking the kids, all the people at the borders, this incredible European refugee crisis. Next story, first Republican debate. Or second Republican debate, or whatever it is. It's a mini-series. And called Republican Debates. People are watching these for entertainment now. CNN is charging enormous amounts of money for advertising because the Republican debates are so wacko. People are like watching them, which they never would have done before. So what's the two words that bind all of these stories together that CNN neglected to mention? Climate change. Okay. Flash floods in Utah, climate change, obvious, right? Drought and fire. Firefighters right now in California are saying we've never fought fires in these conditions like this on the face of the earth, ever. It's never been this dry and this hot this late in the year. Climate change, easy. Syrian refugee crisis. A lot of people don't understand the Syrian war. There was a severe drought in the rural agricultural areas of Syria for years. So imagine it didn't rain here for like 5 years, and everything died. Everything died. All your crops died, all the cows died, and you have an authoritarian regime that's only giving water to a few of their friends. So you go and protest in the capital, and this is what happened in Syria. You go and protest in the capital. Some teenagers wrote a slogan on a wall that said, "Down with the regime," or something like this, and they had a protest. That protest was brutally repressed. They took some people hostage and prisoners, tortured them. That created another protest. All of a sudden, you have a civil war on your hands. The world's first climate change civil war that is like completely out of control. And if you look at some of the bombing pictures of what's going on in Syria, it's truly like a landscape that you can't recognize because every building is, in some places, is completely destroyed. CNN missed that part of it. And then, of course, this was the first time the Republicans actually addressed climate change during the debate, and they all said it didn't exist. They missed that too, though, right? Instead, we're running Donald Trump talking about whether or not he thinks Carly Fiorina is attractive. We could take a poll. Is she attractive? I don't know. What I'm saying is, this is masquerading as the news. And what I think of this as is the architecture of denial. That you don't have to be Donald Trump or Carly Fiorina or Marco Rubio or any of these people to be a climate change denier. You can simply forget that that's what's happening and that the emergency is happening now and not identify it. And then every story on the news is like the two-headed chicken story. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, a two-headed chicken was born in Schenectady. You know, that's interesting. Let's go to the next story. You know, wow, how could all these things happen? I was talking to Sandra Steingraber. She told this amazing story, which I'll steal from her, about her climate change awareness moment when she was sewing a polar bear costume for her son for Halloween out of a chenille bedspread. And because she had done so much animal surgery, she was a really good seamstress. And she wanted to make it really anatomically correct. So she was creating this polar bear costume. And she realized, while she was doing it, that it was likely that the costume would outlast the species. And then when she went out for Halloween, she saw down her street all these children who were going extinct. You know, kids dressed up as monarch butterflies. Or here's a kid that's a bumblebee, you know, or the icon of Halloween itself, the little brown bat. And that all of these kids were going extinct. And she said that this moment brought her to her knees with a little plastic pumpkin full of Kit Kat bars. That was it. And that woke her up. And, you know, we're facing this crisis of denial, not just on the level of, okay, the politicians are saying it doesn't exist because we know they're funded by the oil and gas industry, but also within the very fabric of how we process information and what we do with that information and how we are going to go forward. And there are, I think, quite important pieces of information that people need to know in order to plan your day. So anyway, then I get on the plane and I go to Winnipeg. And in Winnipeg, there is the world's first human rights museum. It's kind of amazing. It's a human rights museum. And in the basement, on the first floor, they had a special exhibit where they actually had a copy of the Magna Carta. from 1300, where all the lords and these people wanted to use the forest, and King John was brutally repressing them, and they actually outlined the very first case on Earth for human rights. And it was there, in the, like the first floor of this weird museum in Winnipeg. So I thought, well, this is amazing. And then there's this incredible spiral going all the way up this Museum of Human Rights. And they have exhibitions on workers, and exhibitions on the civil rights movement, exhibitions on the suffragettes, and exhibitions on freedom of religion and Malala. And then you get to the top, and it's like action and what you can do. And all throughout this 10 or 12-story museum, not a single mention of, I had a bet with myself, and I won, of the tar sands, which is this insane oil and gas extraction that's happening 100 miles from that museum, which is causing cancer rates in the indigenous communities there to skyrocket. If you don't know what tar sands are, it's the world's largest industrial project. This is the boreal forest that it is destroying. Let me see what I can do here. There we go. And then you get there, and it's literally scraping the surface of the earth off. And it pollutes all the water. So you see the boreal forest ending, and then you just have this moonscape of total contamination. The waste pits of the, it's this tar that's stuck in the sand, and they boil it down using enormous amounts of water and natural gas. They use more water than a city of 2 million people. And this is what Canada is doing with their boreal forest, which is a sister forest to the Amazon, right? They're actually in a kind of global communication about how to regulate the climate. So none of this was at the Human Rights Museum. Because we can talk about human rights, but not what we're doing. We can talk about how all these principles matter, but we don't want to acknowledge it ourselves. And I think that this is, these pictures, this is from my call to action with Bill McKibben to go get arrested in front of the White House, which we did. If you look at this wastewater going into this waste pit, you can see them from space. So not only couldn't I take the train, I had to then go to this Human Rights Museum, and I wanted to talk about, because fossil fuels are one of the greatest human rights challenges that we face right now, and getting off of them. But more than anything, to me, this was just so symbolic. You know these instances, right? You know it from knowing your own life. It's very, very hard to examine your own patterns, the things that you're doing. And so it would be very difficult to indict the Canadian government that paid for the Human Rights Museum in the museum, right? But it's necessary. So when I got to the top, there was little cards that you had to write out, and I wrote, "It's an absolute. You've undone your entire museum by not mentioning the thing that you're doing." So what are we doing right now? Not only as a nation, but also as people who are working on climate change and working on these issues. Okay, so we've warmed the climate by about 1 degree right now. That's enough to get everything on Earth to start melting, right? We've seen polar ice caps start to melt. It's enough to make the atmosphere 5% wetter, which is a huge difference in the physical change of the planet. That is supercharging hurricanes like Hurricane Sandy, which you're probably familiar with, or Hurricane Irene. Irene and Sandy were Sandy was the largest storm ever recorded in the Atlantic Ocean. Irene was a pretty close second. And we're seeing the similar kind of things with cyclones in the South Pacific, right? We just saw the biggest Category 5 hurricane or cyclone in the South Pacific ever, and hit an island called Vanuatu, which we cover in the climate film. So we know that extreme weather events are on the rise. We probably have another half of a degree of Celsius. We probably have another half of a degree Celsius already baked in, because the carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere, there's a kind of a lag time between how much is up there and what the effects start to be. So we know that climate exists on this 30, 40 year time scale. I'm going to put this down because it feels weird to keep holding. So global governments and a lot of activists, a lot of people are saying that our target for Paris, our target for Copenhagen 5 years ago, was to keep climate change at 2 degrees. Not a lot of leeway. 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. 2 degrees Celsius sounds good. It's kind of a round number. It kind of got baked in to this negotiation from a while ago. 50% of the coral reefs would be saved at 2 degrees, which means that 50% of them won't be. 2 degrees is sort of the internationally accepted target right now. So recent studies have shown that 2 degrees Celsius engages a pattern of warming that will rise sea levels by between 5 and 9 meters. Some people say 10, some people say 7 meters. Okay. Lester Brown, noted climate change leader and analyst, says, told us in our film in 2010 that we needed to cut carbon emissions by 80% by 2020 to save the Greenland ice sheet. Naomi Klein in her book says the window to 2 degrees, unless we do drastic emissions changes, closes by 2017. Now these are some of the brightest people on earth, and I sit there and I go, now what part of me do you want to take you seriously right now? Like, how is that going to happen? And then you get into the climate question further and further and further, and you realize every single human system on the face of the planet has to change. And if the climate's not going to change. Agriculture, energy, politics, transportation. Tall order. The red there is what's underwater at 2 degrees. That's a 6 meter rise in sea level. You can go on Google Earth and do an overlay of how many meters rise and see what's gone. I think it's at 1 meter, JFK and LaGuardia underwater. A lot of the FDR Drive and the West Side Highway underwater. I mean, 7 meters uninhabitable, New York City. So you're going to get a lot of new neighbors. How is that going to happen? Is it going to happen in the way that Katrina happened, where you have all those Upper East Siders trying to get across the George Washington Bridge, facing the shotguns of Passaic? That's what happened at Katrina, right? The black people tried to leave, and they couldn't get out because they wouldn't let them. The cops were there. Let's go back to the Superdome. Or will it happen in such a way that we can plan? My good friend Tim DeChristopher, who spent 2 years in federal prison because he tried to defend oil and gas auction. You might have seen a movie about him called Bitter 70. I was with him yesterday morning. He said something really rather remarkable I want to repeat, which is that, when a ship sinks fast and when a ship sinks slowly, these are 2 different ways that the shit goes down. On the Titanic, which took hours and hours and hours to sink, they could get women and children to the lifeboats. They could figure out who was supposed to go down with the ship and who wasn't. Who was supposed to, there was an orderly procession that employed a certain degree of the values that we cherish, right? In getting people out of that situation. But when a ship goes down fast, it's usually the people who are strongest, most manipulative, have the most might and the most wrath who survive. And everyone else doesn't. So I'm sitting here telling you this ship is sinking. And it's irresponsible for us to not actually start going, okay, well, where are those people going? Now. Not in 30 years when it starts to sink fast, right? Not when we have Superstorm Sandy where New Yorkers drowned in their own houses because the water came in so fast in non-flood, non-evacuation zones, right? Places that they weren't told they needed to evacuate from. Water came in so fast, in Sheepshead Bay, water came in so fast that people drowned in their own homes. Like, that's, and then New York responded. We're really, really good in a crisis. Human beings are great in a crisis. We are really good at being generous, at restarting community, of figuring out systems where we actually put aside the greed and competition that are the basic values of our society right now and work from a different set of principles. We're really good at that. And we were great at that in New York. But there's a moment where you can't adapt, right? There's a moment where these things start to become incredible conflicts. And you're starting to see that in Europe, right? You're starting to see these refugees in Europe. Do you want that situation now or not? I mean, in the future. Do you want to start planning for it? And I it's a downer in a lot of ways, right? It's not good news. But it's, I think, again, what are the stories we want to tell? What are the songs we want to sing? What are the values we want to embrace 200 years from now? Because 200 years from now, that map even looked way worse, you know. There's a, well, let's just leave it there. I mean, this is not just the United States either. I mean, we're talking about London, Rome, Lisbon. The red zone here, it goes all over the place. And Africa, it doesn't look like there's a lot of coastal flooding, but Africa, at a 2-degree average for the rest of the world, Africa is talking about 4 degrees, because it's averages, right? So 2 degrees, you know, in Scandinavia is kind of nice. But in Africa, it's 118 degrees in the shade. And all agricultural production is pretty much done, and that village life is over. So Desmond Tutu came out and said, if you aim for 2 degrees, you pretty much cook the planet. James Hansen, right, who you know testified in front of Congress in 1988 for NASA saying climate change is a problem, is saying 2 degrees is a disastrous target. But we also have to say, okay, how are we going to get there? I mean, are you willing to walk out of this room right now and just stop going back to work and try to figure out all of this stuff and do that en masse for the rest of the year? I mean, what are the things that we have to do to make this achievable in some way? First thing we have to do, I think, is start telling the truth. Because otherwise it's, I mean, look, yeah, there's Bangkok. Beijing underwater too. All these are and a lot of the coastal cities, most of the world population lives on coastlines. And when you have no stable coastline anymore, when you don't know that the ocean it starts here and the land starts here, it's very hard to figure out. Right now, we're giving out mortgages along the coast of Williamsburg and New York City, right, with these new high-rise luxury condominiums that are going up, going up, going up, going up. And, you know, it's possible that the term of the mortgage will be longer than the term of the time that that building will be on land. So these are things that, you know, like I said, figuring this out means, like, well, what does it mean? I think it in my film on the climate, you kind of encounter this problem and refuse to get out of it. Because most of the movies about this, or most of the books and most of the information about this are all like, we can do it. You know what I mean? And I feel like, yes, we can do it, but what is it? You know, human beings are capable of anything. We're probably not capable of living underwater. I mean, for the most part, unless you're like Kevin Costner. But the idea that we really want to do it. We really want to make it better. We want to beat Hitler. We want to defeat slavery. We want to end fracking. We want to fight climate change. So I'm grappling with this. And the film then, because it's true what Sandra is saying, at 2 degrees warming, we lose something like 30 to 50% of the species on the planet. That's a lot of goodbyes. To name all of the species on the IUCN Red List would take days. The Red List of Endangered Species would take days. And it's not just climate that's killing the species, it's habitat loss and all these other human factors, right? And to learn about those animals would take decades, and to love and appreciate them would take a lifetime. And we're sitting here going, oh, they're going to go away. I mean, the grief is kind of, if you deal with it, really deal with it, it's sort of unimaginable. So there are people on the planet Earth right now that are doing this, right? They're the people who live in the Pacific Islands, who have 5 or 6 years left on their islands, before the sea level saltwater intrusion makes it impossible to have fresh water or farm. Okay, there are people in the Peruvian Amazon who are being destroyed by oil drilling, who 3,000 species of fish in the Amazon, more than all the oceans combined. And people in these communities are eating canned tuna because the water is despoiled. And they go out every day and they try to report on oil spills, right? There are the Pacific Climate Warriors whose motto is, "We're not drowning, we are fighting." And I'm with them in the film, blockading Australian coal ships in the port of Newcastle in hand-carved indigenous canoes. It was remarkable. And what I learned, of this, what I learned from this crisis, or what I am learning from this crisis, which is a crisis in a way of imagination, right? You kind of have to imagine what this is, because there's no movie that could illustrate what it's like to have a mass exodus from a major city, or all of the major cities Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, Providence, Miami, and it doesn't all happen at once in the same place. Like what's happening now. We had this thing with Katrina, we had this thing with Sandy, we're having the, amusement parks underwater, and that's relatively mild compared to what this would look like. So it's a crisis of an imagination, but to me it's a crisis of values. And a crisis of honesty. So when we're faced with this, do we want the ship to sink fast, where we scramble and there's violence and there's grappling for control? New York City Police Department is one of the biggest police forces on the face of the earth. It's one of the biggest military forces on the face of the earth. They have offices in Jerusalem and Berlin. They have offices all over the planet. They could not maintain order on the Rockaways. The gangs took over in the evenings after Sandy, right? After sundown, it was like, volunteers go home, because it's not safe. So do you want the ship to go down fast, or do you want the ship to go down slowly, where we're like figuring this out in accordance with our values, in accordance with democracy, in accordance with generosity, in accordance with principles? And in every one of these places I go in this film, whether it's the Pacific Climate Warriors or whether it's the island of Vanuatu, where they have indigenous forms of democracy that are hundreds of years old, or the people who rebuilt each other's homes after the Hyde Park fire in Colorado, there was a principle that, or Africa, where you see charitable organizations installing solar in non-electrified regions in Africa so kids can get an education. For me, this stops becoming about meters of sea level rise and stops becoming about carbon dioxide count in the atmosphere and methane in the atmosphere, and starts becoming about who are we as human beings? Can we say those principles of education that we discovered in those places in Africa, that we have to hold up? These principles of resistance that we see with the Pacific Climate Warriors, that we will resist, that they will put their, you're seeing people in these tiny little canoes up against coal ships that are the size of the Empire State Building, and people threatening to be sucked under these huge tugboats that are pulling them out to sea. Are you willing to put your bodies on the line to do that? Are we willing to have resilience, wherein, so for example, Vanuatu got hit by these cyclones, and they went back to their traditional information and built cyclone huts that 20 people can actually hold the foundation in place when the storm hits. So resilience is another important value here. Generosity and community. Occupy Sandy, the Northern Colorado rebuilders who went and built each other's homes again for free. Just did that. Decided that that was the way they wanted to be that was what they wanted to be as a community. And another one that's important, I think, is knowing your neighbors and knowing your community and investing in them. I mean, we're very good at knowing where our property borders are and where, like yours is there and mine's over here. But do we invite those people over for dinner? Do we say that when the shit goes down, I need you because you could turn, not only because you could turn against me, but also because we have to be able to embrace a different kind of humanity. We have to be able to figure out that this, 150-year-old detour into really complex systems of greed and of competition and privatization was probably the wrong way to go. It made a lot of amazing stuff, but it's going to end up as not the tools that we need to go forward. The tools that we need to go forward are different things. There are value structure. Because I truly believe that we can take anything. You know what I mean? We human beings are remarkably resilient, innovative, beautiful, and can be very kind, generous. And, we come together in rooms like this to talk about art, to talk about how do we move forward. But I do think that from my perspective, which is a unique one, because I watched this movement come together in the face of a threat. I watched people use the information as a tool and say, oh, no, we don't want volatile organic compounds near our schools. We don't want fracking fluids in our water. We don't want politicians who are being paid off by the Koch brothers representing us. And watch this happen again and again and again and again and again and become one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen be created on the face of the earth. So information was our tool. It was our way of going forward. And the honesty of that information in the face of an oil and gas industry that was constantly telling you you were wrong, that it didn't exist, that it was a hoax, that there was no such thing as flaming water, that there was no such thing as of impacts and harms. You had to cling to this information because of science. You had to cling to it. So this is science. And we have to say these are the tools that we need just as much, even though it's bad news, right? We have to take that and say, this is our information, this is our science, this is what we're working off of. Not some fantasy that we're going to make it all better, but how are we going to pull upon the things that are inside of us to make it bearable? Because the question is not anymore, how do we stop climate change? It's how do we keep it humane as it changes? Right? Because this is what makes us feel good. This is why presumably you're all here in the room to talk about this. And for me, I think filmmaking is extremely important in terms of information, right? This is a film festival. It's fantastic. But if there are people in the room who are filmmakers who are thinking about, my movie that I want to fix or change this issue in the political world, right? It's really, really important that it's not just about, here's the movie, and it went on TV, and now I'm going to go make my next movie. It's about the campaign. It's about the reaching out. It's about making things. It's about awareness. It's about bringing people together in the room. If you're a filmmaker, if you're the filmmaker, you have the responsibility. Now, this is something I didn't really want. We kind of were thrust into it and sort of got the hang of it and realized that it was really, really fun to go and meet all these people every night in a different town, whether you're in Plattsburgh or you're in Oneonta or you're in, Bedford, PA, or you're in San Antonio, Texas, or Farmington, New Mexico, or all the Athens, Ohio. Like, these are the things that we as filmmakers have to do, and that we who have this understanding, how to tell the story. You got to get out in front of your story. You got to talk to people. It can't just be something that's on a screen. You know what I'm saying? Because movies can change the world, but they don't change the world without that other part of it. They don't do anything. They're kind of a blip on the radar at this point. It's something that you looked at on your iPad, on a flight to Winnipeg. I'll take questions. Thank you very much. okay. Yes, ma'am. Well, I have hope. Okay, so Paris. The question is Paris. There's a Paris big conference. I was at the last one in Lima. Nothing was going on there. In Paris, I have hope that there will be an event and it will be a coming together. Will we get a binding agreement? Will a binding agreement in a government make this change? I don't know that I have faith in that 100%, right? I know that there can be amazing things that happen when all these people come in the same room, right? It's kind of like the Woodstock of climate change, right? Paris, everyone's going to Paris. I'm going to Paris, or I was invited. I don't have a plane ticket yet. If anyone wants to sponsor my trip to Paris, no, trains to Paris, unfortunately. So I think that there's going to be some amazing cross-pollination that happens there. There's this thing that's happening right now between Obama and the Chinese. I wouldn't say the United States and the Chinese because the rest of the United States government is kind of not really on board. But Obama's out there and keeps making new deals with the Chinese. It's kind of amazing. Now, the Chinese last year committed to building, to have their peak in emissions, and I think it's 2030. And they committed to building 800 to 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy in China in the next 15 years. 800 to 1 terawatt, 800 gigawatts to 1 terawatt of power, renewable energy installed is approximately the entire United States. So if the Chinese can do it in 15 years, why can't we do it in 10? You know what I mean? These are the kinds of things that but will it will it stop this? Probably not. Because India and Africa and all of the developing nations of the world have to start to develop in new ways. Now they are. So there's a way to do it. Maybe. I mean, nobody really knows. But what I know is that we're at 1.5 degrees. And the carbon budget for us and the rest of the world, we are in conflict. You know, there's 2 billion people on the planet that don't have electricity right now, and we want them to have electricity. We want them to have a better standard of living. Or it's 1 billion. I may be off by 1 billion or so, sorry. But the idea that we're going to develop the world and make world better for all these people is in direct conflict with the idea of climate change unless we do it in a sustainable way. And there may not be that way. So I have a lot of hope in all of these gatherings because I have hope in what we do with an emergency. But the deal between Chinese and America, where they committed to building all this renewable energy and the carbon peak and everything else, has less than a 1% chance of keeping the world under 2 degrees global warming. So even though you have these huge policy strides, they are very necessary, and they're very, very important. And also, like my friend Tim likes to say, is, you know, we don't really, we know the science. So we know that the window for this is you know, closing. And by the time we hit Woodstock Film Festival next year, you know, we're kind of got to be at, you know, 60% emissions reductions. Like how's this going to happen? And I'm, you know, like I said, there's a lot of different speculation about this and how to do these things. But what I do have faith in is how if we engage the conversation on an honest level, which a lot of people are having that honest conversation, then I believe in our ability to be creative. And creativity, by the way, is one of those values that I'm talking about. So, you know, in a way, when we think about the future of all of this, that's one way to look at it that can leave you with a certain kind of, like, I don't know, professional sports mentality. Like, the Yankees are going to win the championship this year as long as they do this, and I hope that it gets, you know what I mean? Like that kind of rooting for us. But if we're dealing with today, we're dealing with this, I think the conversation is a little bit different. Like, it's like, how do we start to make sure that we're having these kinds of conversations every day now to prepare for to prepare for the worst, or at least the medium worst. I mean, this isn't even near the worst in terms of sea level rise. Is in the back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, okay, animal agriculture. That's what I said. What do you think I said? Edible agriculture? Animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is a very strange thing. What it means is how much meat we eat. We eat approximately 9 ounces of meat per day, per person. That can't be the diet of the future. That is a disaster. That's like 20 ounces of oil per, I think 21 ounces of oil per, 27 ounces of oil, something in that high range per Big Mac or per quarter pounder. That's a total disaster. So one of the value propositions here is also eating a hell of a lot less meat and starting to dismantle this industrialized meat agricultural system. When I talk with Michael Pollan about this, he's not, by the way, like a hardcore vegan. He's saying there's a place for animals in the diet, and there's a place for animals in agriculture. So is Wendell Berry, by the way. That when you have, for example, cows grazing on a field, it's interesting because grass actually takes carbon out of the air and puts it into the roots. And the roots will grow as high as the grass will grow. So when you cut the grass, a big piece of that root will die, and that means the grass is actually depositing the carbon into the soil. So when you have animals grazing to cut the grass, which you might be doing with a lawnmower or some fossil fuel-based contraption, you're actually helping the process of carbon coming out of the atmosphere. And if you're composting, you're actually creating a carbon sink on your farm, which is amazing, and that's being done in a lot of farms in California. So, you know, the big issue, though, is again, it's lifestyle. You know, these are warehouses of enormous cruelty. These are things that we'd rather not look at. In fact, in some places, it's illegal to shoot them. It's crazy. Do you know that there are these ag-gag laws, which say that if there's a feedlot like across the street from your house, you can't take a picture of it from the road? Do you know that Gasland would never have been made had those laws been instituted in 2009 when I was made? Because you couldn't shoot a gas well either from the side of the road. Now it's illegal to do that in PA, and it's illegal to do that in Wyoming. There's no way I could have made Gasland with all those shots of the wells because I was on a public road just shooting them. And this is the agriculture industry that's doing this. So yes, Bill McKibben calls it Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Exxon, because he thinks we should go up and down the list of all the oil and coal and gas companies and name the storms after that instead of like harmless young girls like Sandy, you know. So Hurricane Exxon, Cyclone Shell, you know, and then my friend Nellie Mackay, who's a wonderful singer and great animal rights activist, says, no, we should call it Hurricane Dyson, you know, and Hurricane McDonald's. And it's true, because we're contributing. This is one of the huge contributors to emissions, both of methane and of CO2, because you're using not just the animal part of it, but the industrialized agriculture of also plants. But there's a lot of ideological conversation about it. Some of it I think is not true. Some of it's true. Like grass-fed beef is totally different than the beef on a feedlot in terms of the carbon budget. It just is. But from the ethical standpoint, it might not be, right? So it depends on how you want to look at this. Are you doing this because you're campaigning for animals, or are you doing this because you're talking about the climate? And I think you have to be precise about that. But definitely, it's having a plant-based diet is a very, very important step, right? People can eat meat 3 times a day. Not only is that really bad for you, it's also really, really bad for the climate. And when you look at fish, my own personal love of fish. I love fish. I love to eat fish. I love to catch fish. I love to go fishing. I love to study fish. Fish is one of my big passions. You shouldn't eat fish anymore because the oceans are being fished out. And I got an advisory from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection that if I go fishing in the pond behind my house, I should only eat 1 smallmouth bass per month, because they're predator fish and they bioaccumulate mercury that's raining from coal-fired power plants in the Midwest or across PA. And that's true in the Delaware River. in the most pristine watershed that we have. So I love fish in every possible way. I love to catch them, eat them, look at them. So like there are ways into nutrition that I think are very, very helpful for the whole rest of your body too. There's a great movie, not really a great movie, but great information in a movie called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. It's on Netflix. Just watch that. It's about a guy who decides to drink juice for like 40 days. And he completely defeats his really strange autoimmune disorder and loses 75 pounds. It's kind of, you got to watch it. It's kind of amazing. So there's things inside plants that all of the parts of our cells need. You know what I mean? That are not, that the bacteria, the probiotics need, that are not being given to you in your Big Mac or your meat and potatoes or your bacon egg breakfast. Potatoes are great. I don't know. Potatoes are kind of boring. But I love food and I love cooking, and my mom can tell you, she's Italian, she's a great cook. So there's like something about it, but I do think that it is an important thing to address in our value-based conversation about how to go forward. Yes, Marge. How do we even get to begin with this? Does everybody know about the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership? It's another. It's like another WTO, or NAFTA on steroids for the whole world. It's basically it's a secret agreement. Oh, geez, I don't even know. This is like the things like if we imagine all these amazing movies and imagine all this stuff in our creative community that we take part in and watch, like somebody dreamed up Beasts of the Southern Wild. Someone dreamed up Barton Fink. The evil people in the world have just as active a crazy imagination. And they dreamed up this thing called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which overthrows every democratic institution in the world so that corporations have more dominance than ever before in every possible category. So that's it's like the most dastardly thing that you can imagine. And it's a secret. And it's supposed to open up trade barriers. Okay, so that and a lot of environmental laws can be overthrown by a secret tribunal, where a company can say we're more important and more powerful than your fracking ban, so we're going to frack here anyway. That remains to be seen. I believe that power comes from the streets. I believe it comes from where we organize and where we fight. And again, though, there's certain levels of nefarious government activity that become almost impossible to combat. So I think it's very, very important that we organize against TPP. What can people do right now? Twitter storm this morning against TPP. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And these systems are on a collision course. The system of global mega capitalism, which filters all the money and wealth up to the 1%, and all the rest of us and the planet are on a collision course. And that is one of the moments where I think that becomes very clear. But I have faith in the same organizing that I always have faith in. So what I would instruct you guys to do is make sure that you're a part of the movement in one way or the other. If you're a part of the movement on fracking, somebody's going to tell you what to do as the next moment for TPP. If you go on the Gasland Facebook page, for example, I'm not saying Facebook is a good thing because Facebook is monitored by the police, as I discovered last Friday when my house was raided. But that's a whole other story. You'll hear about it probably. But I think that it's the most important thing you can do. Is devote a section of your time, whether that's your work time, your free time, your school time, your lifetime, to working on the movement. And America right now is a nation of movements. And they're all interconnected. The Black Lives Matter movement, the Occupy movement, the anti-fracking movement, the anti-climate change movement, the anti-TPP movement, the movement for reform in government, the movement to get money out of politics. When Zephyr Teachout and I toured all over New York State and the movement for renewable energy. America is a nation right now of overlords and movements. That's what we are. We're not a democracy anymore. Princeton proved that we're not a democracy anymore. Princeton University did this study 2 years ago, or a year ago, that asked the question, what form of government does America actually have? Without making any assumptions. And they looked at all these public policy questions, and they looked at all these ways that people vote and patterns and all this kind of stuff. And they came back, lo and behold, America is not a democracy, America is an oligarchy. Which is why, 75% of people want action on climate change, and we don't get it. 85% of people want a minimum wage hike, and we don't get it. 90% of people want background checks on people buying magazines for their AK-47s that are over 30 rounds, and we don't get it. Because there are powerful lobbyists and powerful corporate interests that overshadow and basically strip you of your own representative government. So America is a country of overlords and movements right now, because movements do get things done. Movements ban fracking in New York, right? So don't kid yourself that if you're not in a movement that you're actually doing anything. You might be clicking on some things, but don't kid yourself that you're doing anything unless you're actually devoting time, real time to the movement. So whatever movement it is. We were with Aria Doe at the Action Center in the Rockaways. We did Solutions Grassroots, our Solutions Grassroots tour, and if you're not signed up for renewable energy yet in New York, go to solutionsgrassroots.com and sign up at Ethical Electric or sign up at one of the services that can bring you wind power or solar power on the roof of your house. So we're in the Rockaways with an 85% black audience, African-American audience. Doesn't happen a lot with the environmental movement. And Aria Doe, who's the head of the Action Center, who's in our movie on climate change, gets up and she goes, Eric Gardner is a victim of environmental problems. Because he died because the police choked him and he couldn't breathe. You have the t-shirts that say, I can't breathe. But he also had asthma. And he had asthma because he lived in the black community. Because you're in the black community, you're that much closer to a coal-fired power plant. Asthma rates are much, much higher than in a white neighborhood. The line runs through it all. This is about basic economic inequality. So America right now, I would say, is in this moment of Michael Bloomberg and everybody else. Pro-fracking Michael Bloomberg, by the way. Don't make a mistake there that man cares about climate change. Yes, in the front row.
And this is slightly redundant, but it seems to me that international corporations actually have more power than governments. So I'm wondering, how do you get that change with these corporations? Also, many people.
Stop buying their products. I mean, that's number one. We try to talk about this in terms of switching with Solutions Grassroots. We went out there, we went to 17 different cities in New York State. We switch your power. And people were like, they got this consumer paralysis. It was like, do I go with Ethical Electric, or do I go with community energy, or do I put solar panels on the roof of my house, do I do geothermal? Do I get an electric car? Do I get a battery system? Do I do geothermal loops? Who's this? What? Wait a minute, where was I start? And at the end of it, you do nothing. And that's a problem. We encountered this problem. I think what we have to do is a boycott. I think you have to boycott the businesses that are not divesting from fossil fuels. I think you have to boycott places that are not being socially and ethically responsible for your purchases. And I think as part of that boycott, it's time to boycott your utility. How do you boycott your utility? Well, you buy your power from one of these companies that's an ethical company that gives you wind power, that's building new wind farms. And you can do this in New York State, every last one of you. And if you do that, you also help fund the movement, because those ethical companies give money to Move On and Credo, and the fracking movement. And 350.org, and all these amazing things. And if they get big enough, maybe one day they'll pay for one of my movies. But my point is, though, that, first of all, just stop giving them money. You're giving the Koch brothers money every month in your electricity bill. But beyond not giving them money, I say, you know, if Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or Walmart isn't divesting from fossil fuels, to getting their assets out of fossil fuels, if they're not, I would say go further than just don't shop there, because that's a little noise. You told your friends, I don't eat at McDonald's anymore. But if you go out there and picket them, and you go out and get a picket line going at your local, whatever, what's the store that you hate the most? I hate Dunkin' Donuts. Walmart, what else? CVS, hates CVS, hates Starbucks. There's a lot of hate in this room all of a sudden. How do you turn it into love? Well, you get your friends together and put it on a bunch of signs and get out in front of the Starbucks and shame people for going there. I don't know if it's Starbucks, whatever, I don't know. But Volkswagen. I'll tell you something, you're going to see those corporations start to respond. You want to fight the corporations, attack them. They're attacking you. You know, the pro-polluter status quo has got a gun aimed at every person's head in this room. You know, it's an airplane going straight down and accelerating. They don't want anybody to bail out. Bail out. Go and protest them. Go stand out and your local news will be like, why are you protesting the Dunkin' Donuts? And you'll be like, well, because that's a major corporation and they have holdings in ExxonMobil, they have holdings in Peabody Coal. I don't know, I'm just making this up. You do the research and you figure out where's your target. You know, these are suggestions. I would come. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
We all have to heat our homes in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
What are the options really realistically?
Mm-hmm.
Is solar working well enough in this water latitude and longitude?
But it does actually. Let me give you a tip. Well, okay, so there's a new website called My Domino. Write this down, mydomino.com. It's run by a guy named Tom Dinwiddie, who is a solar, he was at one point a solar maven. He sold his company. He truly cares about climate change. So he invented this thing with the guy who made Google Glass, or it's called mydomino.com, I think. And at that is a concierge service where you can literally call them up and be like, okay, this is my home, and this is my car, and this is my this. And they will outline for you how you get off of fossil fuels and save money at the same time. And their website is like, let's see if I can get it. It is that value proposition. It is defeating the idea that that it's too expensive or that it doesn't work. Hold on, it's connecting to the internet. So the idea, though, that it's not really true, to be honest. Like that these things cost you more money. There are a lot of different ways that they don't cost you more money. That they're in fact actually cost effective. I think I might have killed my internet connection, but no. Anyway, yeah, mydomino.com is one of those concierge. Here it is. And guess what? The first line is not stop the world from climate change. Oh, no. There it is. It's about, yeah, it's like, for some reason this doesn't want to, there we go. And then, so you can actually do this at your house, and then you connect, and then they relax. This is the language of global capitalism here. But see, like, relax. More cash, less carbon, small actions, epic effect. So this is what they're doing. And I think it's cool. I'm gonna do it at my house. And we also have solutionsgrassroots.com, which is another way you can immediately go on to. There's a company called Ethical Electric. This is my attempt at doing this. That we're going to use as part of our. We're using My Domino. We're using this as our engagement campaign for our climate film. So these are part of it. But to me, it's about a boycott. To me, it's about saying. Here we go. So to me, it's solutionsgrassroots.com. you can have clean energy right now. Go renewable. And there it says there's 3 tabs. One of them's easy, easy plus, and hardcore. Let's change the world. So easy is about switching to ethical electric or community energy, which are 2 ESCOs. You can basically just buy from a wind farm instead of buying from the coal-fired power plant or natural gas-fired power plant. Or you can, easy plus is put solar on your roof or do things that augment your house. And hardcore change the world is where we really are interested, because that's where we get people organized. So those are some options, right? But again, if you're part of a movement, you're going to figure that out. That's going to be part of your daily bread, right? If you're meeting with your neighbors to figure out climate change, someone's going to have found this website or that website, and you're going to do the research, and you're going to figure out that is the source of all the information these days. You know, you're going to find that those answers through the movement is going to be the fastest way to do it, and we need you. And the way you should interact with the movement, by the way, is not some boring way, right? Like, I'm not an organizer. I'm a filmmaker, so I wanted to make a movie. So I did it. I stayed in the movement for a long, long time because I'm doing something that I love. You know, I can't organize a sock drawer. I don't even have a sock drawer. You know? I knew that was going to happen. But you know, so you have to do it in a way that you love. So if you're one of those type A people, go in there and organize. If you really like to do graphic design, make graphic design. If you know what I mean? Interact with this in a way that's going to sustain you, because that's the way it'll work best. Yes, in the back. Well, it sort of is. This is part of it, but I think for the new film, I mean, we're you know, that we do try to interact. I do try to interact in the best possible way with the mainstream film infrastructure. So we're trying super hard to, everyone in this room go home and pray that we get into Sundance, because Sundance is a really good platform. You know what I mean? As every filmmaker knows, the people here in Woodstock, the filmmakers know this is a great platform, right? And it's all about timing. When are you ready, and what are you aiming for? And this is the first possible instance. So if we don't get in, we'll try to go to Tribeca. If we don't get into that, we'll try to go to Cannes. If we don't get into that, we'll try to go to Venice. You know what I mean? But festivals help you launch what you're doing. The film will be on HBO in 2016, which is great. HBO is an amazing platform. But our grassroots engagement campaign is ongoing. We expect this tour to be all over the world. We're going to tour different places than we toured with Gasland. Gasland 2, we toured to a lot of the fracking areas. With this new movie, we're going to tour a lot of coastal communities, right? All the places on that red map is where I want to be, all over the world. Even if we just organized people in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Miami, we'd be so further ahead than where we are right now. So the idea is that when the tour, and we'll know, I mean, if you sign up at Solutions Grassroots, just in the sign-up box, or sign up at gaslandthemovie.com, you'll know when we're doing the tours. And what we basically do is go out to the community and say who wants to host us, and try to get as many organizations in one town together as possible, and then we go ahead and do the screening. So we're aiming to get like 1,000 people at each one of these screenings, which would be more than we've ever done. Some of them have been really big. Some of the screens we've done have 1,700 people, which was amazing. But some of them are smaller groups, like 40, 50 people. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
A commercially sponsored station, the main station in town, you can get time as a nonprofit, very inexpensive. Like 6 p.m. Sunday, or sometimes we get sports program, you can get in, or the weekday different evenings, and then have your local gathering, and you won't have 100 people or 500 people, you get 3 or 4 times as many, because they know who you want. They advertise and promote. It's not expensive
Right.
to do anything like this.
Well, I mean,
We don't do that, I'm saying.
okay, well, here's something that you can do right now, along those lines. Tomorrow night, on the Chris Hayes show on MSNBC, which is basic cable, it's not what you're describing exactly, but it's MSNBC's a wide range. I will be on that program to do an innovative kind of premiere. We're showing our new film called Gas Work, which is a short. It's 45 minutes. It's about workers in the oil and gas fields and how they're dying at 7 times the national average and how they're being poisoned on the job. and a lot of them come forward and admit to a lot of the contamination events that we're talking about in Gasland, and it's an extraordinarily powerful piece that follows the Bevins family from West Virginia, whose son died on a gas rig in New York State, in Smyrna, New York. And we're asking people to host watch parties at Solutions Grassroots, I think. Anybody know where this is? Tomorrow night. In fact, yeah, tomorrow night, 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock is the Chris Hayes show. So we're asking people to host watch parties. Now, the watch parties can happen at any time. You know, it can happen over the next couple of weeks. But I'll be on the show tomorrow night. We're going to be showing 5 minutes of the new movie on the show. I'll talk about it for 5 minutes, and then we're going to request people to go to the website and see the film. So the website is gasworkfilm.com. And it will also hopefully be at the MSNBC website. We're actually working out the details of that. But what we're trying to do with all these is engage people. And I have faith that, you know, these kind of brilliant ideas are going to be the ones that percolate to us when we put out the call. And then we will do it. Because like when we do the Gasland tour, we go on the local media. I do a lot of local media and get people in the room. And we do have, I think it's had a really substantial effect. So with this new film, we're asking people, because we're also doing the climate film, we're asking people to do their watch parties at home for gas work and continue to use that to campaign for worker safety and to campaign for bans on fracking. Yes, ma'am.
I really appreciate this focus, and it occurred to me as you were showing that map
Mm-hmm.
that the call really is to begin the triage.
Yeah.
And that may actually be a more powerful call than change the renewable or change the diet, that people really get.
It's all part of the same package in a way. Like it's all part of this, right? And I think that being honest, it's hard to be honest, right? Because there's so many different, there's thousands of studies, and it's hard to be giving people bad news. And I think the psychology, I watch a lot of the leadership ping, like a tennis match is going on in their head, like, how do I motivate? It's all about getting people motivated in a way, right? And I don't know, like, I kind of feel like that's up to you. Like, I can't tell you how to do that. I never have. I mean, with fracking, we just said, here's the information. You do what you want. And it became this incredible, beautiful thing that people really, unbelievable, stunning. I couldn't possibly try to control that or even influence it in terms of being prescriptive about here's what you should think or you should do. In a way, that's not, I'm very uncomfortable with that idea. But I can say, here's the truth, and here are some examples of what I think is most beautiful thing I've ever seen on the planet. Like, watching those people who, their islands are going underwater, literally not ever quit, is incredible. It's amazing. And they're doing it with so much joy. You know, there's something there to be that I could hold up as an example. But I do think that, unfortunately, a lot of this is like a marketing campaign where we want people to do this one thing, and therefore we have to say this to them to get them motivated. Because a big problem is how depressing it can be. Because when you get that depressed, you get overwhelmed, and then you disengage, and you just don't want to do it. But I think we kind of you have to kind of go through it and come out the other side. Because that's possible, right? If you continue to suppress it, you continue to embrace this architecture of denial, right, inside of ourselves, then I don't see how you fix it. I don't see how you do the right thing. I think you go and you start to campaign for climate targets. Meanwhile, we still haven't moved. Meanwhile, we just bought a condo on, you know, the beach. Like, okay, let's take one last question, I think, because we're done. Yes, sir.
Earlier in this conversation, you mentioned the Republican Clown Club. They all tend to have it on climate. I only see one candidate that's talking about any of this.
Uh-huh.
Have you endorsed him yet?
Yes.
You have.
In fact, we know who we're talking about, right? Bernie Sanders. Yeah, this is amazing. Okay, so I'll tell you Tim DeChristopher's opinion again. The easiest thing that we have to accomplish as the climate movement is electing Bernie Sanders president. That's the easiest thing that we can do, right? And what's amazing is, people really, when someone's actually getting up there and telling you the truth, it's working. And I think there's enough disillusionment about certain things that we hoped Obama would do and be that pushing more people in the direction of Bernie. And I think Hillary is like new Coke, There's a lot of brand loyalty there, but we just don't like how it tastes. It's just like, it doesn't taste right. This feels wrong. Feels like this person is focus grouped into a mirage of themselves, which is sort of weirdly, amazingly sad in a way, right? Because Hillary, I think the person who's been so beaten up by so many different things and keeps trying to do it. But I don't know I mean, Hillary promoted fracking all over the world. And Hillary, was the head of the State Department when Keystone XL was about to be ratified by the State Department. Hillary Clinton is not a climate campaigner. She can decide. She's been around so long. She can't say, "Oh, I used to not be for gay marriage." You know what I mean? Like, she wasn't. She said, "I believe marriage is between a man and a woman," and you kind of can't get out of it at that point anymore, right? So you kind of have to just say, you know what, something new has happened, and get out of the way for it. And I think Bernie is incredibly exciting. Like I said, I believe in the grassroots. So I would like to see that. Registration for voting in New York is October 9th, John Lennon's birthday. You have to register as a Democrat. Yeah. Yeah, in March or April. So you have to register as a Democrat by October 9th. Right. Yeah, you can. You can do it. Yeah. In New York, it's going to matter. It really is. And it's going to be it looks to be like one of those long primaries again, which would be interesting. But thank you. Yes, by October 9th, John Lennon's birthday. That is when you have to register to be a Democrat. And you can go to my DMV. I just did this. My DMV. That sounds like a thing you don't want to go to. Like, my mycoronary.com. My spike through the forehead.gov, New York, whatever. myrootcanal.com. Yes, Marge. It is. And there's a party at Marge's house right after this. Actually, is there? I was making that up. My mom says there is. I'm not going, but my mom's going, and everybody likes her better than me. Let's end on that note. Thank you very much.